out, particularly during this period of time while we're all at home. I'd like to jump back in and talk about our new normal prosthetics for implant overdentures and determine what that actually means. For a second, someone in the United States turns 65 years of age. And what that means as far as edentulous is that we still have a need for treating the fully edentulous patients. We have these 76 million baby boomers still healthy and wanting to enjoy life. Edentulous continues to grow as not only baby boomers, but even younger people tend to lose some or all of their teeth. 50% of the implant prostheses being done currently are overdentures, as opposed to only 27% being hybrids. Here's some unknowns that we're going to be facing after the pandemic, and there are many of those unknowns which we will have to find out and work our way through. But one of those is, what can and will patients be able to afford, and particularly in the field of implant prosthetics, after we return to work and hopefully get back to some sort of normalcy. We don't really know what that's going to be, particularly with insurance coverages and patients themselves getting back to work and trying to deal with their financial issues. What we do know is what happened after the 2008 recession. And during that period of time, as I alluded in a previous webinar, I certainly found out some things that I could and could not do as well. And that was that hybrids and bar overdentures waned at that point in time because of the cost of doing those. Now, I will note that the all-on-4 procedures have become much more accepted and attractive to patients since 2008, but still we found that overdentures were quite a bit more attractive after the 2008 recession than they were before that. Some things that we do know about overdentures. The cost of doing overdenture is far less than that of doing a hybrid. In some cases, about 1/2 the cost prosthetically for doing a hybrid, whether it's acrylic or zirconia. It certainly takes us fewer appointments to be able to complete an implant overdenture. Prosthetics are more user-friendly, if you will. And the unsplinted overdentures are far more forgiving from a technical standpoint than bar overdentures or hybrids. So let's take a look at overdentures and what they allow us to do. Here's an example of an overdenture case that we did many years ago. The typical overdenture case, maxillary and mandibular. Here we are preoperatively. This was the patient's upper and lower denture prior to having implants placed. Occlusal problems, as you can see, as well as retention problems. So we put the patient into a soft liner while we placed implants in the maxilla and the mandible. I chose this case because it's a fairly typical case with 4 implants in the maxilla as well as the mandible. And one of the things we learned after the 2008 recession was that we could, in many cases, place 4 implants in the maxilla, allow them to be unsplinted without bars, and still successfully restore the case. And this particular patient is a good example. Here are the 4 implants, upper left and upper right being the maxilla and mandible. A semi-palateless maxillary overdenture and the lower denture, as you see on the right side. This case was completed prosthetically in 2003. Implants were placed in 2002. And these are conventional or traditional flask cured acrylics, as differently from what we do in many cases today with milled acrylics. Another look at the maxillary and mandibular overdentures in place at their outset. This illustrates some of the things that we're looking for, and we'll talk about today. Getting a tryin that allows us to preview a good lip support, a good smile line, and good phonetics. When the patient smiles in a fairly animated smile, we want to show most of the denture teeth. without a lot of the pink acrylic. Another good full face look at a good animated smile from the patient. And most of our patients would rather not expose a large amount of acrylics. And here we are 8 years post-delivery, the same maxillary and mandibular overdentures, the same locator abutments from Zest Dental that were originally placed. And then 17 years post-delivery. So in this particular case, we've never changed the locator abutments. There has been some wear on those, but still they are intact enough to provide very good retention. These are Nobel BioCare tapered groovy implants, 4.3 millimeters in diameter by 10 millimeter lengths. So I think this is a good example of being able to have good longevity with our overdentures, as well as some of the other fixed cases that we've illustrated. As you can see, 17 years later, the prosthetics have worn some, and there's some deterioration, but as far as the patient's concerned, they are fitting very well. The only thing we've changed periodically are the colored attachments, as you see in the interior of the appliances. And actually that is 17 years longevity now. So the implants have stayed very, very well integrated. This last panoramic x-ray shows no bone loss around the implants. And all of those have locator standard traditional abutments in place. We want to look at two types of workflow today, the traditional and the newer one workflow, which would employ digital scanning and milling. So I'd like to illustrate the digital aspects also using a 3-appointment overdenture workflow. Sorry about that interruption. I'll just keep on going. In the 3-implant overdenture workflow, we're going to have digital and milled acrylics, and we're going to have an expedited format. Here we have 4 implants in place in each arch, 4.3 millimeter diameters in all of the implants except one of them. And this patient actually was treated with a conventional overdenture 7 or 8 years before we decided to redo one of them. You'll notice a great deal of divergence in the angulation of the implants, which can be very problematic and in some cases would require using a bar. We did not splint these implants together with a bar. We used the traditional locator abutments, and you can see the silver color showing through with due to wear on the locator abutments, and I'll address that later on. At the point at which the patient was about to retire, she wanted to have some redo done, so to speak, but she told me she could only afford redoing one arch. And so we chose to redo the lower arch in a digital scanned and milled appliance. And again, she told us that she could only afford financially to do one. So we hope to be able to do the maxillary overdenture at a later date. Now, this particular expedited technique utilizes a duplicate denture. And I made this duplicate denture not for the patient to actually wear, but to use as an impression tray. Her existing overdentures were satisfactory enough with after opening her vertical dimension to utilize those as a guide for the new milled mandibular overdenture. So on the right, you see the duplicate overdenture that I've constructed. And then we're going to place that in the mouth, confirm that her occlusal vertical dimension is satisfactory. And then we're going to use that lower duplicate overdenture as an impression tray. Here you see I've used 2 impression materials, light body and heavy body viscosity materials, to border mold and do a wash impression using the duplicate overdenture, the duplicate denture. And then we're going to send that to our laboratory to be scanned. We will actually not be pouring any models or mounting models on an articulator. Everything will be done virtually to create a tryin and then the final overdenture. This is being done as we send the impression of the duplicate denture to the laboratory. The laboratory partner then places this into the scanning device, and then through software allows us to put everything into a virtual screen for a virtual setup. Scanning and then setting up teeth for a virtual preview, as we call it. The preview here shown in just some still shots can be rotated in all directions for me to view. I'm able to approve that by looking at that online, making any suggestions for changes that I might want, and then having that milled for a tryin. One of the nice things about the digital preview, as I said, I get online access to the virtual setup. I did not have to purchase any software in order to do this. My laboratory partner is the one that provides the software. And we don't have to purchase any denture teeth for the tryin. Everything will be looked at online. Here we have the tryin, which is a novel type of tryin for those of you who have always used denture teeth set in wax, as I did previously. This is a completely milled tryin from Abutment called a biofunctional tryin, or a BTI. It is milled from the fully milled acrylic, sent back to me to utilize just as I would for a denture setup. This goes in the mouth, and we evaluate for all the parameters that we would normally use in a denture setup. Occlusal plane, aesthetics, phonetics, and degree of fit. It did fit extremely well when we simply put it in. The patient commented that she could wear this one home. So we felt very confident that we could move on after just a few small changes in occlusion. We want to uncouple the anterior 4 teeth, as I've discussed previously, and then proceed to milling and finishing of the overdenture. So back to the laboratory, back to the Abutment facility, where this is the completed, fully milled mandibular overdenture. As we've discussed previously, these are not actual denture teeth. These were milled out of a solid puck of acrylic, white and pink. So I've received the milled overdenture here with access openings milled into the appliance. Here we see some milling done of the external, and then the intaglia of the overdenture. And the milling of that takes about an hour to an hour and a half. Once I've received the milled mandibular overdenture, then I'm going to pick up all of the new locator housings and attachments intraorally. So here you see the metal housings that have been snapped on to the locator abutments, still using the patient's original locator abutments, and the white spacers that allow us to pick these metal housings and attachment up without locking the overdenture in place. So we picked up on the lower right-hand side the black processing attachments, and then we will select the proper type of retention from the locator family of attachments. In this case, we've chosen the red extended range attachments that allow us to give us enough a retention, and then also to be able to seat the overdenture successfully. So here we have fitted or placed and delivered the mandibular fully milled overdentures. We certainly wanted to improve the aesthetics here, so we've chosen a brighter shade, and we hope that the patient would agree to move on with replacing the maxillary in the near term. And that was very successful, as you'll see from her comment.
This is much more comfortable. And the minute you put it in, just with the first trial, it was so much more comfortable. And we didn't have to do any adjusting like we did with the original one that would take like weeks to get it to fit right. So this just feels wonderful.
And due to the patient's satisfaction with this, we were able to move on pretty quickly, as you'll see. Here's just a recap of the 3 appointments for this expedited procedure. So with the duplicate denture in place, we will get a bite registration and a wash impression of the duplicate denture, send that to our laboratory where it will be scanned, and through the software, a preview developed for me to approve or disapprove or make changes. Once I've approved that setup, then it goes back to the lab facility for milling of the solid tryin. That comes back to the office at the second appointment for us to try in. And once we are satisfied with that tryin, we send it back to the lab. That will be rescanned, a new preview sent back to me if necessary, and then the case will be milled and delivered back to our office on the third appointment for delivery. It's even possible to bypass that try-in appointment if you're very confident of your parameters as far as bite registration. If you're very satisfied with the preview that comes back, you might even eliminate that try-in appointment and move on simply to a 2-appointment procedure. The next day after we delivered the patient's mandibular case, she told us she was ready to start the upper. So she was very happy with that. We moved on with the duplicate of the patient's maxillary overdenture, creating a new duplicate there simply for use as an impression tray, not for the patient to wear home for aesthetics. And then we will do the same procedure, a wash impression, a bite registration, sending all that back to our laboratory after our first appointment. And we will have a scan done of that and then a preview sent back to us, just a couple of screenshots of the various images that I'm able to look at and then change if need be, and then approve for the virtual setup, moving back into a milled tryin. This is a different case, but what you'll see is being able to look at where the denture teeth portions will rest, particularly relative to the ridge itself, as well as to the locator abutments. As you see in this portion here, we're pretty close to the locator abutment. We're able to move those teeth or change that interface or that space over the locator abutment and then move on and create our tryin and or our final overdenture. Here's the tryin on the maxillary in place against the already completed mandibular overdenture. Once we've approved that, I like to take at least 2 or 3 or more bite registrations to send back to the laboratory for scanning. We can use the shade guide that is provided by the milling facility, or now we can coordinate whatever shade we want to with basically any shade guide that's out there on the commercial market, including Vita, Dentsply Portrait, as well as all of the other shade guides. At the try-in, we're looking at the midline to see if that is acceptable. It was. We also wanted to confirm our vertical dimension here with dots on the nose and chin. So we're using a Bowley gauge to confirm that the patient's closure at the occlusal vertical dimension is acceptable. We did note that there was a slight cant in the incisal edge position of the maxillary anterior teeth. So we noted that with photographs and instructions, and then sending that back to the laboratory, we're able to correct that in the virtual setup without having to do another try-in. So if there's actually no adjustments to the try-in, you can simply send that back to the laboratory and have the milling process done. Any changes that are made to the solid try-in are then incorporated back into the software. A new preview is created and then approved before finishing the case and milling. Here we have the completed maxillary milled, Abutment milled maxillary overdenture. I've already picked up the attachments there in those photos, and we've completed the case with the new maxillary and mandibular overdentures. This slide illustrates the family of attachments available from the traditional previous locator attachment system. We'll look at the new system shortly, but in the traditional system, and you'll still be dealing with this a lot, you have 3 studded attachments with a dual retention, a stud that engages the center port of the abutment. And then on the lower line, you see these extended range attachments, which allow us to accommodate divergence in implants up to 40 degrees, 20 degrees per implant site. And we use those when we approach 10 degrees. Here we have the maxillary and mandibular overdentures in place, and the patient's full smile. I would like to also illustrate or emphasize the need for a phonetics evaluation at the tryin. And for that, I use these 4 sounds, the F, V, TH, T sound, and the S sound. And I use these tests in that order, building up to the most difficult sound to produce, which is always the S sound. I'd like to shift to the traditional attachment overdenture appointments, the 4 appointments that we typically use. First appointment being an implant level impression or an abutment level impression. If the locator abutments are already in place, then you may be able to keep those in place and just use those for your master impression. At the second appointment, we call that our records appointment, where we obtain a face bow jaw relation record and mount the case on the articulator. The third appointment is typically devoted to the wax tryin or the solid milled tryin, depending on which type of procedures and format you're using. And then once we approve the wax tryin or the milled tryin, then we can go ahead and finish the case in traditional acrylic or milling. So again, that's the traditional format. We're going to look at the impression procedure for the first appointment using this heat molded available tray called the Denplant impression tray. And while it's still soft, we can put it in the mouth. We can manipulate the tray, or the patient can do so herself here and actually create a custom tray. Our impression procedure is typically done with, our impression procedure is done with a 3-step approach. In the first step, we're going to establish occlusal tray stops. So here we have heavy DMG Honigum material placed in these 4 little dollops of impression material. We'll seat those very slightly short of the vestibule. I do like to have the cheeks retracted to allow me easier access to get into the mouth, so there's an assistant holding these retractors behind the patient. Once we have developed our occlusal tray stops, I cannot overseat the tray. The second step allows me to get border molding done with 3 or 4 movements on the part of the patient. The patient first will manipulate the buccal vestibule with the pooch and smile. Will open wide to obtain the hamular frenum, and then we will occlude the nostrils, have the patient blow or cough in order to establish the post dam. Once that's completed, the third step is a wash or final border mold. So we're going to wash in a lighter viscosity material. Here we're using the light viscosity Honigum material, and then we're going to inject all of this material into the vestibule and all around the impression copings. So we basically want to bury the impression copings in our impression material. Then we will seat the impression tray fully loaded and return once again through all of the border molding steps on the maxilla, the pooch and smile, open widely, and then occluding the nostrils while the patient coughs or blows. And then once that impression material is fully set, of course, we will retrieve the impression tray. And what you will have is a very pristine impression, generally with very good border molding areas of all the muscle attachments. Then that can be poured in your lab or sent to the lab for pouring. On the right side, you see all of the Implant impression copings have been placed into the impression, and now that we're ready for pouring the master cast. On the lower arch, of course, we did get a lingual border mold. So we, with the initial and the final border mold, the patient sticks the tongue straight out and side to side. And the pooch and smile here activates the master muscles, and the patient will actually deliver a very good buccal vestibule border molding for us. Once again, the completed impressions are in place. I'm using Honigum rigid and light viscosity here. There are several aspects of this impression material that I like. One of them is that the material does not tend to run as much as some of the other impression materials do. So that's the impressions are sent to the lab. The lab pours the master cast. The abutments are selected, in this case, the locator abutments, and the case is returned to our office. What we want to have is the retentive portion of the locator abutment, or any abutment, slightly supragingival. We don't want that buried down into the gingival sulcus. Then the other thing that we do at the second appointment is a little trick called the lip ruler. This lip ruler is gradated out in millimeters. It's placed up under the upper lip, and we can make a measurement. There's a landing area that is set against the upper ridge. We want to note where the lip line falls at rest, as well as at an animated smile. And if you're using base plates and wax rims, this is very helpful to your denture technician in being able to set where the incisal portion of the wax rim should reside. So at our second appointment, we get all of our material back from the laboratory, master cast and base plates and wax rims, if that's your procedure. And then we will complete a face bow, centric relation record, and in some cases we will use tooth shells. So the traditional method for getting our incisal edge position, again, is a base plate and wax rim, or we can use a wax rim with tooth shells in place. In the traditional technique, we will contour our wax rim slightly longer than the resting lip line. We will mark in the wax rim the midline, the high smile line when the patient goes into an animated smile, and the ale of the nose. All of those markings will give our technician very valuable information about where to set the teeth. Again, we'd like to have the incisal edge position at rest approximately 1 to 2 millimeters beyond the lip line. Then I will use a centric relation Gothic arch tracing using the Massad jaw recorder to get my centric relation. And I hope to have time later on today to show you how that's done. Video tutorial as you see on this website. Once we've mounted the case, we get a wax tryin where we are going to evaluate all those areas that we've discussed previously: aesthetics, occlusion, phonetics, and facial support. The setup guidelines, whether we're using a milled solid tryin or base plates and denture teeth, I would like to have the posterior teeth set in a lingualized occlusion. I would like to establish cuspid disclusion, or cuspid rise, as it is often called, but I would also like to avoid contact in centric of the anterior 4 teeth. And here at the wax tryin, we're going to evaluate the patient's centric relation, opening and closing, opening and closing. So that's the sort of setup we'd like to be able to see in the mouth as well as on the articulator. If there's very much a variation, then we've got to reset teeth and possibly go into additional wax tryin appointments. It's a happy moment when we're able to see that those teeth come together in good occlusion. And at the fourth appointment, once we have approved all of the setup, we will either process in standard acrylic, as we will do in this case, or go to a milling procedure. One of the nice things about scanning and milling is you can do your entire traditional procedure all the way up to approval of the setup and then simply send it to the lab for milling. Here are the completed overdentures in place, blue dots placed where I'm going to pick up all of the locator attachments. So once those are set in the mouth, we'll illustrate that procedure later on. We go back. We're going to light cure through the denture bases to pick up all of those intraoral metal housings and attachments. Again, we're using standard locator attachments in this particular case, before on the upper left and after on the lower right. Intaglia view of the lower overdenture. This again is not a milled overdenture. It's a standard conventional acrylic. And when I've used standard acrylic, I've always reinforced those denture bases with a metal casting. So here we have before and after picking up the attachments. Panoramic radiograph of the implants and the attachments in place. And again, those have stayed stable. Implants have stayed well integrated over the years. One of the problems with this case, however, is a wide divergence in the angulation of the implants. So the lower anteriors display this pretty significant anterior trajectory versus the posteriors. And over the years, we found very severe wearing of the locator abutment to the point that the patient's retention was really poor. At this point, your options are to remove those abutments, put in new locator abutments, or use the newer abutments from Zest Dental, which are called the RTX. Here's an example of the traditional or legacy locator abutment, and on the lower right, the RTX, which does give us an increased degree of retention and a lower rate of wear. The RTX comes in these four retention levels, 0 to medium and high, all packaged together with the attachments and metal housings. There is a dual groove and flat plane area design for the RTX and a pivoting technology that allows it to go into engagement of the abutment. So in this patient's case, with the worn locators that we discussed or illustrated, I'm going to replace his mandibular overdenture with a milled technology and using the RTX. Here we're looking at just the tryin with the setup. This is a milled denture base with 6 anterior teeth in place, which we found to be very acceptable occlusally. And then we could move right on, place posterior teeth, and go ahead and finish the case with a milling technology. This illustrates the new abutments that have been placed, the RTX abutments from Zest, which are obviously a different color. They're very distinguishable from the original locator abutments. I'm going to pick up the 4 RTX attachments with black housings, black attachments rather, and white spacers, which again keep us from locking the overdenture in place during the pickup procedure. I generally do pick up all 4 RTX attachments at one time. So here we have the milled overdenture with access openings in place, ready for me to pick up the 4 attachments and metal housings. On the upper left, I've placed blue medium level retention attachments, which I subsequently changed to the high retention level owing to the patient's desire and need for a really strong amount of retention. Blue one's a little closer up, medium level. These are the clear high level retention level attachments in place. I think it's important with overdentures to stress to the patients that there will be a small amount of movement with the overdenture, particularly with sticky foods in place. These are not locked down, rock solid, like a hybrid case is. So some patients might expect that, have that expectation level. They're certainly retentive enough for very good function, but there will be a slight amount of movement that the patient will feel. Here we have the completed mandibular milled overdenture in place, and in occlusion against the patient's traditional maxillary overdenture. At a later date, I did change the patient's maxillary as well once finances permitted. But I think you get a good look at the aesthetics of the milled, fully milled mandibular overdenture. The teeth look just like denture teeth, but they're completely milled out of that solid puck of acrylic. And so at this point, I'd like to illustrate how we accomplish an intraoral pickup of metal housings and attachments in the overdenture. Because as you do overdentures, this will be part of your life. Not only will you be doing this at the delivery appointment, but also in certain cases, the metal housings will become loose and you will have to reset those within the denture base. So here we've got two implants in place on the mandibular arch, standard traditional locator abutments in place. And onto those locator abutments, we're going to snap on our metal housing with a black attachment already embedded into it. That's the way you'll purchase the metal housing. That attachment will be changed once you pick this up to the appropriate retention level for the standard locator. Once those have been popped into place, we will place our white spacers or block out spacers. And again, that prevents you from locking the overdenture in place with your pickup material. The other white spacer in place here. Okay. And then we're about ready to pick up these two sites. And again, this is a 2 implant overdenture, not a 4. So I'm going to use a light cured pickup material. I'm going to inject that around the metal housing first, and then fill the denture base. In this case, we're using a milled tryin denture base because we're going to pick up those attachments and confirm how retentive this will be before we process. I'll guide the patient into occlusion. I've already painted blue dots onto the buccal and to the lingual aspects of the tryin to allow me to light cure through the tryin and solidify the pickup material. So with the patient in occlusion, we'll put our shield over and then light cure through the buccal and the lingual aspects. Typically going to light cure for at least 30 seconds on each side from the buccal, possibly a minute, and then I have the patient open and light cure 30 seconds to a minute from the lingual. These materials will self-cure or auto-cure in about 7 or 8 minutes, but by light curing, you're able to speed up the process. If you have an assistant with you and have 2 curing lights, we can cure both sides simultaneously. And then I have the patient opening and cure from the lingual area, as I mentioned. So the process for 2 implant sites to pick up the attachments could consume a good 3 to 4 minutes or more than that for a 4 implant site. And then the patient closing into occlusion. So we're able to reconfirm the patient's occlusion as well as take the milled tryin out in this case and preview how much retention we're going to be able to have so the patient can understand how much retention she will have in the final product. And incidentally, that's a milled tryin on the maxilla for a standard denture. No implants replaced on the maxillary arch in this case. So here we picked up the metal housings. We've removed the black attachments from the housings, which are now retained within the denture base. And we've placed in two red extended range attachments for the patient to preview. One of the other nice aspects of a milled tryin is we can send the patient home or send the patient out for lunch, and she can evaluate how comfortable and how retentive the appliance is going to be. Certainly something you cannot do with a wax setup. Now I'd like to shift to illustrating how we can obtain centric relation at the patient's correct vertical dimension using a Gothic arch tracing. You know, I mentioned at our last webinar that this is possibly one of the most stressful procedures we have and one of the most difficult, finding centric relation, again, at the correct vertical dimension, so that when we do the tryin, we're always nervous about how well the patient's going to come together. Are we going to have an open bite that requires a lot of resetting? The Gothic arch tracing for me has been very, very helpful in consistently being able to reproduce a good, repeatable centric relation, and also, again, at the patient's correct vertical dimension. So here's the procedure for doing that and the armamentarium for doing that. Dr. Joe Masad and I developed the Masad jaw recorder, which utilizes this tracing pin, as you see here. That pin will be pushed or scribed against a table on the opposite arch with a marking pin on the table that allows us to create an arrow or the Gothic arch. So we utilize, in this case, an upper striking plate that is embedded into a light cured base plate. And then on the right-hand side, you see a base plate that has connected to it a lower pin holder. So the kit for the jaw recorder includes both the striking plate and the lower pin holder. As you will see, a ball bearing and the striking pin will be snapped through that hole in the lower pin holder. In order to get centric relation, we first must find physiologic rest position, and from that, we will then determine the occlusal vertical dimension. And then at that point, we will establish the Gothic arch tracing. You will see some tutorials at that website, nobilium.com, for further investigation. So here we have the patient at rest. We have dots on the patient's chin and nose. We've done this by having the patient exhale numerous times, come to rest, and instruct the patient to leave the lips slightly separated. I also use a phonetic technique by having the patient just pronounce the letter M and then have the patient come to rest. M, exhale, and come to rest with the lips slightly apart. And we remeasure that over and over until we get the same rest measurement at least 5 times consistently. And actually, you'll find that the patient will start coming to that same rest position pretty quickly. So if we have a theoretical separation here of 65 millimeters measurement at rest, we want to close the patient anywhere from 1 to 5 millimeters to create centric relation or the occlusal vertical dimension. We close through our freeway space from rest position to occlusal vertical dimension 1 to 5 millimeters. So if this were 65 millimeters, we want to close the patient somewhere between 60 and 64. Again, having the patient exhale after saying the letter M, and we will have the OVD come 1 to 5 millimeters inside the rest position. With the striking plate and the lower pin in place, then we will continue to measure that until we can develop that 64 to 60 millimeter measurement. The pin can be lowered or raised through the ball bearing that it's attached to in the lower arch to increase or decrease the vertical dimension. And once we establish that reduction in vertical dimension from rest position, we're ready to do the Gothic arch tracing. Another aspect of the Masad recorder is that the striking pin, being in a ball bearing, can be rotated in any direction to create the more ideal perpendicular relationship to the striking plate. So once we have established the patient's closing at the correct occlusal vertical dimension, and in this case, we're just going to say that's a hypothetical 61 millimeters, then we are ready to have the patient close against the striking plate, move the lower jaw anteriorly, posteriorly, and laterally to create the Gothic arch tracing. We'll have painted a mark-a-lot or a marking pin on the upper striking plate, and as the patient rubs the pin against the striking plate, he or she will create an arrow or a Gothic arch tracing. The tip of that arrow right there is centric relation. If you simply move your lower jaw forward, back, and then close, you will feel a condylar seating, and you will feel something very similar to what you want the patient to get to its centric relation. Here's a typical Gothic arch tracing. Again, this line is the anterior-posterior movement, and then the patient moving into right and left lateral excursions. The tip of that arrow is where those lines congregate, distinguishing centric relation. Now our task is to establish that in the mouth. So here's a video of the patient moving the lower striking plate anteriorly, posteriorly, right, and left.
Perfect. And open.
And in the next slide, you will see the Gothic arch tracing.
Perfect.
So there we've captured the Gothic arch tracing. Right there, the tip of that arrow is centric relation. At this point, we will take the striking plate out and apply this little disc that has a plastic disc with a hole in it that's beveled. We'll place that directly over the arrow tip or centric relation. And then we will allow our striking pin to re-enter that area, and we will hold the striking pin in that hole there while we establish a bite registration. So with the plastic disc in place in the mouth, we will once again close the patient and close them into that beveled hole. Then we can inject bite registration material all around the striking plate, the tracing pin, and the plastic disc. This will then connect the maxillary and the mandibular base plates together. And when they are removed, they will be connected in centric relation at the correct OVD, or occlusal vertical dimension. Before doing so, you can reconfirm that you have repeated the desired OVD.
All the way around here.
So we've established OVD for this patient.
We'll get it
We've
around the
closed him
pin.
into the plastic disc with its beveled hole. I'm injecting Futar bite registration material here. I like that a lot because it has very little rebound. And then when the base plates come out again, they will be fully connected together.
Okay, Larry, you can open.
Here we have the connected base plate, maxillary, and the imprint of the patient's natural dentition on the maxillary, his lower striking plate with pin attached on the lower. We can take that now and mount our maxillary model and mandibular models together. If you've used a face bow, you've already mounted the maxillary cast. You will simply mount the mandibular cast to the maxillary using this bite registration. If you've not used a face bow, you will simply use a flat plane articulator to mount both casts using both base plates. Once again, I find the Gothic arch tracing to be very helpful in allowing me to get a good centered relation record accuracy without having to manipulate the patient into centered relation. Of course, there are other methods, whatever works best for you, but I would suggest that you look at this and you can Google the massage jaw recorder and look at some of the tutorials on that, or look at this webinar again. I want to thank you for attending our webinar here. This is our third and final one with microdental. Just to note that I'll be presenting much of this material that I've covered in these three webinars at the next American Dental Association annual session next fall, 2020 in Orlando, Florida. And of course, you'll be able to access this webinar again in 1 week. I want to very much thank Microdental and all the staff